Marcus Johnson had always been drawn to the sea. Growing up in Charleston, South Carolina, he would spend hours sitting on the docks with his grandfather, watching the tide roll in and out. Mesmerized by the way boats bobbed gently against their ropes like horses tied to a fence. For Marcus, his boats were more than just leisure toys for the wealthy. They symbolized freedom, escape, and self-reliance. When he graduated college and built a small but successful logistics company, he promised himself that one day he would own a boat of his own, not just for status, but to honor the boy who once dreamed of sailing beyond the horizon. After nearly a decade of careful saving, Marcus finally purchased his dream, a sleek white and blue cabin cruiser he named Second Wind. The name carried double meaning: his second wind, after years of grinding work, and the rejuvenating breath of sea air he had longed for since childhood, docked in the marina of his gated coastal community. Second Wind quickly became Marcus's sanctuary. On weekends, he would take short trips along the coastline, sometimes inviting friends, sometimes preferring the solitude of open water. He kept the boat spotless, polished the chrome railings himself, and treated every detail from navigation. Instruments to the fishing gear, like sacred possessions. Even neighbors, many of whom only knew Marcus casually, admired the vessel. It gleamed in the sunlight and stood out as one of the finest boats tied up at the community docks. Yet beneath the admiration, subtle tensions simmered. Marcus was one of the few black homeowners in the neighborhood, and while most residents were cordial, there was an undercurrent of unspoken scrutiny. The Homeowners Association, run by Linda Parker, had a reputation for enforcing rules selectively. Some residents whispered that Linda relished control more than community spirit, inserting herself into disputes over mailbox paint colors, lawn height, and even the number of guests allowed at backyard barbecues. Marcus, ever respectful, kept his distance. He paid his dues on time, attended only the most necessary meetings, and preferred not to give the HOA any reason to interfere with his enjoyment of his property or his boat. It was during a particularly hot July weekend that Marcus left town to visit his mother in Atlanta. He locked Second Wind, as always, double-checking the dock lines, and left the keys in his home. What Marcus didn't realize was that the marina's dock office kept a spare set of keys for emergencies, keys that Linda Parker, as HOA president, had unrestricted access to. Linda had been eyeing Second Wind for months, gushing about it at neighborhood mixers, telling her circle of friends how a boat like that really belongs to someone who appreciates entertaining. To her, Marcus's quiet enjoyment of the vessel seemed like a waste. She fancied herself the kind of hostess who could turn a simple boat ride into a glamorous, champagne-filled spectacle. That weekend, the opportunity proved irresistible. With Marcus out of town, Linda told her closest friends that she had arranged for a private sunset cruise. "It'll be unforgettable," she bragged. "We'll have the bay all to ourselves." When one friend asked if the boat was hers, she waved dismissively and said, "I have the keys. Don't worry about it." She neglected to mention that those keys were not given to her, but taken from the dock office under the guise of HOA business. Evening unfolded with an air of indulgence. Guests arrived carrying coolers, portable speakers, and bottles of wine. None questioned Linda's authority. She had always carried herself with a confidence that bordered on entitlement. Locking Second Wind, she pretended as if it were her own, fumbling slightly with the unfamiliar switches but masking it with chatter and laughter. The boat sputtered to life, and soon they were drifting out into the open water, music echoing against the waves. The marina lights dimmed behind them as the horizon glowed orange and pink with the setting sun. For Linda, it was exhilarating. She strutted across the deck, snapping photos, giving toasts, and basking in admiration. Some of her friends remarked on the quality of the boat, the leather seats, the polished wood trim, the spacious deck. "Linda, you've really outdone yourself this time," one of them gushed. She smiled, accepting the praise without correcting their assumptions. In her mind, borrowing Marcus's boat wasn't theft. It was community use. After all, she rationalized, wasn't she the one keeping the neighborhood in order? Didn't she deserve to enjoy the best it had to offer? But as the night deepened and the drinks flowed, reality loomed closer. The boat was not designed to carry so many people and its capacity was clearly exceeded. Guests began dancing, leaning over the rails, and moving about in ways that made the vessel rock more violently than it should have. The music boomed so loudly that other boaters gave them wary glances as they passed by, yet Linda was too intoxicated by her self-importance to notice. Back at the marina, a few neighbors who knew Marcus happened to pass the docks and noticed second wind missing. They were puzzled. Marcus had mentioned earlier in the week that he would be out of town. One neighbor even texted him a casual message, "Hey, didn't expect to see your boat out tonight. Thought you were in Atlanta." Marcus, already seated at his mother's dinner table, stared at the message in confusion. His first thought was that there must be some mistake. His boat was locked, tied up, and unattended. At least, that's what he believed. Meanwhile, Linda continued to play hostess in open waters. She poured another round of champagne and told a story about her summers in the Hamptons, drawing laughter and admiration. But beneath her bravado, a faint unease began to creep in. Steering the boat required more skill than she anticipated, and the deeper waters were unfamiliar. She ignored the warning lights on the navigation panel and dismissed a friend's nervous comment about whether they should head back before it got too dark. Her pride wouldn't allow her to show hesitation. To admit she wasn't in control would unravel the entire charade by the time the Coast Guard patrol spotted the overcrowded cruiser with blaring music. Linda was too far committed to turn back. She tightened her grip on the wheel as the patrol boat drew closer, its lights flashing across the waves. For a brief moment, the party atmosphere faltered, replaced by whispers and exchanged glances. Guests shifted uncomfortably, realizing this. It was no ordinary cruise. Linda forced a smile, trying to project calm, but her heart pounded. She knew she was about to be asked questions she couldn't answer, questions about registration, ownership, and authority. What had begun as a night of entitlement-fueled indulgence was about to spiral into confrontation. The Coast Guard officers stepped onto the deck, and though Linda's face still carried a practiced grin, the truth loomed just beneath the surface. She had taken what was not hers. And there was no charm, no laughter, no champagne that could disguise it. The Coast Guard officers stepped aboard Second Wind with professional composure, their boots thudding firmly against the deck. The music was hastily turned down, but the echoes still hung in the salty night air. Linda Parker straightened her shoulders, forcing a smile as though their arrival were merely an inconvenience at her otherwise flawless party. But her guests shifted uneasily, their laughter gone, their chatter reduced to nervous whispers. Some clutched their drinks tightly, while others set them down quietly, as if discarding the evidence of their indulgence might somehow erase the situation. "Evening, folks," one of the officers said firmly, scanning the group. "We noticed this vessel appears overcrowded, and we need to check your registration and safety documents. Who's the captain of this boat?" All eyes turned to Linda. Her throat tightened. She opened her mouth, but for a moment no sound came out. "That would be me," she finally managed, her voice wavering just slightly. I'm in charge here?" She tried to project authority, but the officer's raised eyebrow told her it wasn't convincing. "All right, ma'am," he replied. "I'll need to see your vessel registration, proof of ownership, and your boating license." Her stomach dropped. Of course she had none of those things. She glanced around, hoping for an excuse to materialize, but her friends were silent now, their earlier praise replaced with suspicion and doubt. The officers waited patiently, though their eyes revealed growing curiosity. "Well, you see," Linda stammered, "the paperwork is back at the marina. I didn't bring it with me. But this is, a community boat. I have access." Words tumbled clumsily from her lips. The younger officer tilted his head. "A community boat? That's not how this works. Either this vessel belongs to you, or it doesn't. Whose name is on the registration?" Silence. A long, heavy silence broken only by the gentle slosh of waves against the hull. One guest muttered, almost under his breath, "Wait, this isn't your boat." The murmur spread like wildfire. Faces turned toward Linda, eyes narrowing, lips tightening in disapproval. She could feel the weight of their judgment pressing in. The image she had carefully cultivated, the gracious, glamorous host was unraveling in seconds. Finally, Linda exhaled sharply, as if surrendering a secret she had hoped never to confess. "It belongs to a neighbor," she admitted, her voice small now. "But he's out of town, and I have access through the HOA. It's fine." The officers exchanged glances, their professionalism unshaken, but their tone firming. "Ma'am, using someone else's vessel without permission is not fine. This is serious. We're going to have to contact the registered owner." Panic surged through her chest. Contact the owner? That meant Marcus Johnson. She pictured the quiet, respectful man who lived 2 streets over. The one she had barely spoken to beyond obligatory HOA greetings. He had never flaunted his boat, never bragged, never asked for attention. And here she was having commandeered his pride and joy for her own reckless entertainment. The officers began asking for the names of everyone on board, writing down details, inspecting the vessel for safety compliance. Life jackets were scattered, but insufficient for the number of guests. The boat rocked uncomfortably under the tension, the festive atmosphere extinguished entirely. Guests sat silently, embarrassed, some glaring at Linda, others avoiding her. Altogether, by the time the Coast Guard escorted Second Wind back toward the marina, the humiliation was complete. Linda stood stiffly at the helm, guided by one of the officers who knew the equipment far better than she did. Her friends disembarked quickly, murmuring excuses, unwilling to be seen as complicit. Within hours, word spread through the community. Like wildfire, the HOA president had been caught using Marcus Johnson's boat without permission, caught by the Coast Guard, no less. Meanwhile, Marcus was still in Atlanta when his phone rang. He stepped out onto his mother's porch to take the call, the humid night air heavy around him. It was the marina manager, his voice strained with unease. "Mr. Johnson, I need to let you know about something that happened tonight with your boat." Marcus listened in stunned silence as the story unfolded. His boat, Second Wind, had been taken out without his knowledge. The HOA president had used it for a party. Coast Guard had intervened. His heart pounded with a mix of disbelief and fury. He clenched his jaw, struggling to keep his composure. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that someone took my property without asking me, pretended it was theirs?" "Yes, sir," the manager replied softly. "I'm truly sorry," preparing a full incident report. That night, Marcus hardly slept. His mind raced through images of strangers dancing on his deck, spilling drinks, stomping across the wood he had polished with his own hands. He thought of the Coast Guard officers inspecting his boat as though it were some lawless vessel, when, in reality, he had always treated it with the utmost respect. And most of all, he thought of the audacity, the sheer entitlement of Linda Parker, who not only trespassed, but did so publicly without a shred of remorse until she was caught. Marcus returned home the next morning. He went straight to the marina. His heart sank at the sight of Second Wind. Though not heavily damaged, it bore the signs of misuse: sticky spills on the deck, scattered plastic cups, a scuff mark along the rail where someone had carelessly bumped into it. His sanctuary had been violated. Neighbors approached cautiously, some offering sympathy, others shaking their heads in disbelief. "Marcus, I'm so sorry," one woman said. "I can't believe she would do something like this." Another added, "Everyone's talking about it." She embarrassed the whole community. Linda herself stayed conspicuously quiet. For days she avoided Marcus, sending no apology, offering no explanation. But the silence did not shield her. HOA was in uproar. Residents demanded accountability, some calling for her resignation, others pressing Marcus to take legal action. Marcus, deeply angered, chose his response carefully. He gathered documentation: the marina's report, the Coast Guard's notes, the text messages from neighbors who saw the boat leaving. He consulted with an attorney, determined not to let the incident be brushed aside as a misunderstanding. This was not merely about a boat. It was about respect, property rights, and the principle that no one, not even the self-important HOA president, was above accountability. At the next community meeting, the tension was palpable. Marcus sat quietly at first, listening as residents voiced frustration and disappointment. When his turn came to speak, he rose slowly, his presence commanding the room without effort. "I worked my whole life to buy that boat," he said firmly, his voice steady but laced with controlled anger. It's not just a possession, it represents years of sacrifice, years of dreaming. And while I was out of town, it was taken from me. Not borrowed, not asked for. Taken. That is theft. That is trespass. That is a violation of trust, not just against me, but against this entire community. The room fell silent. Linda sat at the front, her face flushed, unable to meet his gaze. Marcus continued. If we are to live in a neighborhood where rules matter, then those rules must apply to everyone, including the ones who enforce them. If we are to have respect, then that respect must extend to every homeowner regardless of who they are. I will be pursuing this matter formally, but I hope tonight we can all acknowledge the truth. What happened was wrong, and it cannot be ignored.
Wow.
The applause that followed was not loud, but it was steady and resolute. Residents nodded, some clapping, others murmuring agreement. Linda shrank further into her chair, the authority she once wielded so confidently now stripped away. For Marcus, the battle was far from over. Legal proceedings would take time, and repairing the sense of safety he once felt around his boat would take even longer. But in that moment, standing before his neighbors, he knew one thing for certain. Entitlement had been exposed, and accountability had begun. Second wind would sail again, but this time it carried not only Marcus's dreams, but also the weight of a community forced to confront its own failures.